Hi, this is Teddy. You're listening to the 6th episode of the Two Broads Talking Politics Democratic Presidential Candidates Book Club. On today's episode, the book club discusses Cory Booker's book, United. You can find all of the episodes in the book club series at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com/book club or in our regular feed anywhere podcasts are found.
Hi, everybody. This is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics. We are back for another edition of our Democratic Presidential Candidate Book Club. I think I missed some words in there. And today we are reading Cory Booker's United: Thoughts on Finding Common Ground and Advancing the Common Good. We'll get around to whether we think that subtitle actually has anything to do with the book or not. So joining me today, as usual, is Sophy. Hey, Sophy.
Hey, Kelly.
And the other members of our wonderful book club, we have with us Kaz Weida. Hi, Kaz.
Hello.
And also Elizabeth Thorp. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hi, ladies.
All right. So let's jump into it. Cory Booker, of course, is not very high up in the polls at the moment, but we've got a while to go. So who knows what will happen between now and whenever it is that we're going to choose our presidential nominee. So let's start with just a general, what did you think of the book overall? Did you like it, hate it, somewhere in the middle?
So we've had a lot of conversations during this book club about how we feel differently about the book depending on whether we read it or listened to the author read it.
Uh-huh.
So one thing that I've decided to do from now on is it turns out on Amazon you can hear a free preview of like the first chapter or first few pages read by the author.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been doing that and then reading the book, and I felt like Cory Booker is just so charismatic that it changed kind of the whole experience for me, listening to him read it. It was so much funnier and more interesting when he read what he had written.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if other people read or heard it, but I feel like that's always me with Cory Booker. Like, on paper, I'm like, meh, and then he says things, and I'm like, oh, but he's so charismatic. I don't know.
Yeah, so I listened to the book, and I will admit I listened to it on double speed because it's a long book. I didn't have a lot of time, but he's perfectly.
Yeah, I didn't finish it. It was very long.
He's perfectly comprehensible in double speed, and I don't know, probably like him better in double speed. But yeah, I mean, there's a ton of emotion in his voice, and I think that really helps. I don't know if I would have liked reading it on paper or not, but I really liked listening to him.
I could hear him in the book even without having listened to it. So I did read it. I got it from the library and read it. And I felt like the way that it was written, his voice came through pretty clearly, but maybe that's just because I've heard him speak often enough that I can hear it in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a similar experience, Sophie, where I went into the book with the same sort of attitude that you have about Cory, which is like, yeah, he's okay. And then I was like, oh, I forgot how much I like Cory. He's one of those guys where I have some preconceived notions about who he is, but because he's sort of humble about it, he wins me over a little bit when I actually sit down and listen to him.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's very much a people person, and that comes through pretty clearly in the book.
Yeah.
This is Elizabeth. I also read it, and Kaz, share all your thoughts. I really liked it without hearing his voice. Surprisingly liked it because I've been also interested in what he has to say and has followed his trajectory through being the mayor and then elected to the Senate. But I found myself liking him immensely after reading it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds like you guys agree, but it felt to me like far and away the most emotional of the books that we've read so far. I mean, certainly way more than like Pete Buttigieg or Kamala Harris, that you can really sort of feel what he's feeling in this book, and, sense that there's a real compassionate person there. Like, you may or may not agree with his policies and various other things, but you can't deny his compassion.
Right.
And I feel like
Absolutely.
His personality just shines through so much. Like, the self-deprecation
Yeah.
is hilarious. There's a couple points where he like makes fun of himself, or like he admits that he made a mistake, and I just found him really, I hate to use the word authentic. I know that's like terrible, but I just felt like he was a real person writing the book.
One of the criticisms you hear about Cory a lot is that he's a showboat, right? That he likes to sort of steal the spotlight a little bit. But I think he knows that he has a tendency to do that. And it was very clear in the book that he has learned that lesson a little bit, and that he does try to take it to heart that he can't solve every problem by himself, and he's not there to be a superhero. And that when he does that, sometimes what happens is that real solutions happen. And I, in the same way, I appreciated how self-deprecating he was about that, and how humble he was about, you know, the whole passage where he chases the guy down with the gun. And I was like, oh, classic Cory. A couple days into the mayor's office, and he's going to go single-handedly tackle some man with a gun on the street corner. But he made fun of himself, right? And he talked about how that was probably not the best solution, and how he learned from that experience. And I think this book was very refreshing in that way.
Yeah, you know, and we've seen this in most of the books we've read. There's been a very, with the definite exception of Elizabeth Warren, there's been this sort of linear trajectory, right? Like, and then I did this, and then I did this, and then I was in second grade. And this was, you know, sort of loosely organized around moving around his life. But there was definitely some jumping back and forth, and there were themes that were important in different chapters. You know, and I think he's actually a very good writer. I mean, the writing style, I think, was very compelling.
I agree. I mean, some of the books that we've read, I've had to really kind of slog through. I wish I'd known about Double Time.
It's super helpful.
For a couple of those. But I actually found myself reading this book out of sheer enjoyment, not because I had to finish it before our podcast.
So let's talk about maybe what I want to jump out of our normal format and talk a little bit about what we think this tells us about what kind of president he would be. Normally I save that question for the end, but I think that that's the piece that I struggle with the most about this kind of book. You know, I think it's a good book, and we can talk about sort of our favorite moments and things maybe we wish were there. But to me, the question at the end of the book was, great, I loved it. It was a fantastic memoir. I'm still not sure how this sells me on him being president. I don't know if you guys had similar reaction.
I feel like, to me, this book solidified something that I had heard before but not really understood, which was the comparison to President Obama. I've heard that comparison made a lot between Cory Booker and President Obama, and at first I was like, what? Like, I don't see any connection at all, other than the fact that they're both black guys in the Senate. But Cory Booker in this book comes across very, very similarly to Barack Obama, actually, in Dreams of My Father. To me, like very cerebral, very introspective, very self-reflective. And he's got a very similar message to what President Obama's message was in 2008 and then even in 2012, which is the whole like sort of embodied by his famous speech to the DNC about, you know, the purple states, the United States of America being purple, not red or blue. He's got like a really similar, you know, let's just get along, let's find common ground theme going to the book. I mean, it's called United, and also his candidacy. And so those similarities make me wonder if he wouldn't be similar as a president to Obama, but also make me worry because I feel like that sort of call for unity is kind of, I don't want to say like out of fashion, but I think that it's maybe harkening back to a time that isn't now. It's less practical than I felt like it was in 2008.
Yeah, it's a little naive, right?
Yeah.
At this point, it feels a little naive to think that it would be that easy. I felt, this is Kaz, I felt like I appreciated him really talking in depth about some of the major things he struggled with as a mayor, and how he focused on creating coalitions to tackle those things, and how he found inspiration through some of the community leaders and really sort of dug deep into some of those projects and tried to leverage them to do other things with them, I thought that the last couple of chapters were especially this way. He talked about like the community garden in Newark and how powerful it was to have people who had criminal records come in there and finally get jobs and be able to work and do something and provide for the community, and how rewarding that was, not just for them, but for the community. I got a sense that this is the kind of president that he would be, and similar to Barack, where he would focus on what can we do to leverage what we're already doing and make it better, and what partnerships or coalitions can I utilize to do that. He seems like he's a relationship guy, and I get a sense that that's how he would probably handle the executive.
Yeah, I think I can see him as an executive. It was specifically a president I had trouble seeing. So like, obviously it's easy to understand why he made a good mayor. I could see him as a governor pretty easily. There was just something that was, I don't know, felt somewhat limited to me. I think, part of it may be...
I think you needed more policy details?
Not necessarily more policy, but more a sense of understanding of the whole country. Like, I got a good sense that he understands New Jersey well, but not necessarily that he understands the rest of the country. New Jersey is a fairly small geographical state, that part of it. I think, if you're comparing to Obama had lived so many different places by the time he ran for president. Kamala's book, we've seen, she grew up in different places, lived in Canada for a while. Elizabeth Warren similarly has lived in lots of different places. Cory Booker just felt very much like of the place he lives and hasn't necessarily experienced a lot of other places. And I didn't get the sense that his understanding of how things work in Newark was necessarily going to relate to, where I grew up in Ohio, that sort of thing. That, not that you necessarily have to have all of that, but that was the one thing that I was sort of left wondering about.
So the opposite criticism that I had of Mayor Pete, where I said he was running to be president of the Midwest.
Yeah.
Cory is running to be president of the Eastern Seaboard.
Or New Jersey.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's sort of, and, that is in no way to say that I think he wouldn't be a good president of the whole country. I just didn't get that from this book.
Yeah, I finished the book taking him a little more seriously as a presidential candidate than I did before, just because he is so articulate, and I liked, he made a very, an atypical decision by moving back into the projects after he was raised like, upper middle class. Like Newark, because I've lived on the East Coast for so long, is, definitely having a resurgence, obviously, but it's got quite a dicey reputation. It's not where you would probably choose to live.
Yeah.
So I really liked that. And I felt like, his example with the IHOP waitress and the living wage and his concerns about, racism and I just felt like he's obviously got the smarts and the humanity, which we don't currently have now in the White House, and, policy chops, even though we didn't get too far into the weeds, to be able to handle that job. He's still not my first choice, but like 100% feel confident that he could absolutely be a positive force in the White House.
So what were some of our favorite moments from the book, favorite things we learned maybe about Cory from this book?
I mean, he slyly confirms that, he's heterosexual.
Yeah, I mean,
there.
Or is it too sly?
Hey, Mayor Pete just is married to a man and barely mentions it.
Sure.
Hardly in his book, I mean, so I don't know. Or is that kind of falls into the bucket of, separating personal and professional? What did you think of that? How he fell for that girl?
Yeah, no, I liked the story, and I thought it was very sweet. I did kind of wonder if it was shoehorned in just to be like, hey, I'm not gay. Because otherwise he doesn't talk about relationships with women his own age much at all. He talks a lot about his relationship with these women who are like mentors to him, but not so much with women his own age.
He's been dating Rosario Dawson for several years. He's just been keeping it quiet.
Right. It's just putting it in the book was a little, seemed like it was there for a particular reason.
Well, yeah, I think probably the editors were reading it like, hey, like what you just raised, Kelly, there's no personal details in here. You don't have any girlfriends, boyfriends, relationships, dates. Give me a story.
I really liked the moments where he talked about learning from elders in the community. The guy who first told him he should run for, I don't remember if it was city council or mayor, and the women at the two different towers, where the one where he lived and then the other one who sort of guided him and helped him along the way and became, people who were really pulling for him. I thought we talk so much about sort of youth energy and the importance of young people in activism now, and in seeing these people in his life who were older and who were really helping him. It was neat, and it's something I haven't read in a lot of political memoirs lately.
Mm-hmm.
Sophie, did you have a part you really liked?
I didn't have any parts that I really liked that I haven't already discussed, I think, or that weren't already like sort of overarching themes. I liked it overall, but nothing else that hasn't already been talked about stood out to me as something I loved. Other than his voice, which, like, I could listen to him literally read anything all day. I don't know what it is about his voice.
It's like me with Kirsten Gillibrand.
He's got, like, I don't know, a really nice voice.
Were there any things that we thought were missing or wanted more of?
I don't know that this is something that's missing or that I wanted more of. It's just something that, like, I realized as I was reading this book. I've been thinking about these books that we've been reading and wondering why I had so much trouble, like, sort of identifying with the sort of narrative that a lot of these candidates paint about their childhood and their life, which is this idea of my parents raised me to have this really strong work ethic and to believe that I needed to work hard and that I needed to earn everything and blah, 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 blah. And almost all of these books had that moment where they talk about how their parents or caregivers, like, instilled this sort of drive in them. And I can't say that I really identify with that. I just always feels like, I don't know, it always feels like kind of a political ploy to preempt any criticisms of the left that come off from the right about entitlement or whatever. Because I wasn't raised to care that much about my productivity or to feel as though, I had to work my butt off to get every single thing that I had. My parents focused much more on, like, kindness and, developing your personality and becoming a good person more than, like, you have to work hard and earn everything. And so every time I hear a politician talk about how that was instilled in them, it just sort of feels salesy to me. And there was that moment here too, where he talks about his family instilled these two values. And the second one was, have this communal belief. But the first one was to work really hard. And I just can't really get beyond that.
I think although I think that also might be, like, more prevalent in, like, minority households sometimes, just because it is harder when you're a person of color, that maybe we hear that narrative more than, let's say, I did in my house, because we lived in a white suburban picket fence, situation. But I did really like hearing about how his parents had these high expectations and how he was very close to his dad. It just gives you an insight into, how the adult person is going to turn out, in my opinion. Like, that was something that I really thought lacked in Pete's book.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the relationship with his parents, whatever their lessons were, it definitely comes through that he's got this really strong relationship with them. It was interesting. We didn't hear much about his brother, and then every once in a while he'd be like, "Oh, and my brother," and I'd be like, "Wait, you have a brother?" So that was a little bit odd. But the relationship with the parents was, very, very clear and seemed deep and meaningful. I mean, I don't know. I was raised to value work ethic and work really, really hard. So to me, those, I don't get the same sense from those comments, but I can see that, that definitely seems like something that they're all sort of taught to say in their memoirs.
I think, too, Cory's parents have a pretty fascinating story. His dad was the first Black salesperson for IBM. It's kind of hard to beat, and I'm sure he didn't get there by not working hard. So,
yeah,
right. And his mom.
He's got a really...
They met at IBM. His mom was an executive, I think, too.
I thought she did church, but maybe it was at IBM. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they met at IBM. I thought they were like one of the two first black executives, but maybe my fact check isn't right, but I thought they met at work, and they were both, fairly successful, because he was born here in Washington, D.C.
Well, and the story early on about, them being sort of the test couple to see if there were racist housing policies and whether realtors were pushing black people away from certain areas, that was really fascinating. And having a president who's been on that side of it, as opposed to the president we have now, who is on the other side of it, would certainly be an interesting juxtaposition. Him having experienced those kinds of things in his life, I think there is a certain value to that in when people are making policies that they understand, what happens as a result of those. All right. Well, is there anything else that we want to make sure that we say about this book?
I was just thinking about your question that you posed earlier, that would he make a good president? And there was I feel like when he was the mayor of Newark and even now a senator, when there's an issue, he dives into it to learn more about it, to make the right policy. He talks about that parable about, swimming up a river to find out why children are drowning. Do you guys remember that part?
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely not happening in the current administration at all. And then I like how he addressed mass incarceration, the environment, affordable housing. I feel very confident that he's a Rhodes Scholar. He knows what he's doing. He's very smart. He's hardworking. And then, finally, again, being raised by two IBM execs, he chose to move back into the Newark projects. So I feel like his heart's in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited to get to know him a little bit better. And, I agree with Kaz entirely. I thought, I read it, and he was, he is a very good writer. I felt it was authentic and not, he didn't have a ghostwriter and then just add some detail.
Mm-hmm. What do we think of the title? Let's see. It's United, Thoughts on Finding Common Ground and Advancing the Common Good.
I think it's completely appropriate given what's happening right now.
I understand why one would want to title a memoir of a presidential candidate that way. I'm not sure that's the title I would have given this book.
Yeah, there's not a lot of meat there, right?
Yeah, it's a super bland title. I feel like some sort of running toward danger or something would have been more appropriate for the Cory Booker that we get in this book. Like
Slum Warrior or something like that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we all recommend this certainly as a good book to read, whether or not you're actively considering Cory Booker as a candidate. And then maybe after reading this book, you will be considering Cory Booker as a candidate. But either way, you should go read the book. It's a really good read, especially in this genre, which doesn't always lend itself to good reads. All right. And next up, 3 weeks from now, we will be talking about Amy Klobuchar's book, The Senator Next Door, which is from a little bit earlier. I think it's a 2015 book. So this came out in Cory Booker's book came out in 2017, so he probably had a good idea he might be running. Amy Klobuchar's book came out in 2015, so we will see what kind of memoir it is.
I love that title. Started it, yeah, but that's a great title.
Yes.
It could be like a murder mystery for all we know.
Oh man, if any of these end up being murder mysteries, that will immediately become my first choice of candidate.
Agreed.
So fine.
All right. Well, thank you all. And everyone, if you click on our website on this particular episode, you will see links back to all of the other book club episodes in case you've missed them. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast.